It was to the heart of traditional Hinduism that a skeptical young man travelled in search of answers. 18-year-old Narendra Datta, on the advice of his college teacher, set out to meet the religious phenomenon of southern Bengal, Ramakrishna Paramahansa. It was December 1881, and it was an encounter that was to have the profoundest effect on the spiritual history of not merely an individual, but an entire people. Narendra had already rebelled against the inequities of traditional Hindu society and rejected some of the more popular forms of Hindu religious practice. But his religious questioning didn't end there. The quest for direct experience, for truth, continued. Although it was a short journey from his home in North Calcutta to the hustle and bustle of Dakshineshwar and the worship of the mother goddess Kali, Narendra was looking for a giant step that would bridge the rational and the spiritual, ease the painful tension between reason and faith. And it was this man that would eventually resolve that contradiction and change Narendra's life, the powerful force that was Ramakrishna. As Narendra sat down on the floor in front of him, Ramakrishna was struck by the young man's appearance. Speaking of it later, he said, "I noticed that he took no care of his body. His hair and his dress were not at all trim. He was, as it were, unattached to anything." Later I asked him to sing, and as if in meditation, he sang with the whole of his mind and his heart. When I heard it, I could not control myself. I was in ecstasy.
সংসার বিদেশে বিদেশির বেশে ভ্রম কেন অকারণে মন চল নিজ নিকেতনে মন চল নিজ
Narendra was born on the 12th of January 1863 in a part of North Calcutta called Simulya. His father, Vishwanath Datta, was an attorney with a keen appreciation of Islamic culture and Indian classical music. He read the Bible and the Quran as well as the Bhagavad Gita every day. It was he who encouraged the young Naren to question every idea. His mother, Bhubaneshwari, was more conservative in her Hindu beliefs, but it was she who drilled into her son that the truth must never be abandoned, whatever the circumstances. As a result, Narendra grew up to scorn all superstition. He went to school at the Metropolitan Institution in North Calcutta, where vigorous sports claimed as much of his time as music and reading. Narendra was an enthusiastic member of the local gymnasium and excelled at gymnastics, wrestling, fencing and lathi play. He displayed a striking independence of spirit, and according to his peers as well as his teachers, he was totally fearless. He finished school with distinction in 1879. The following year he joined Presidency College, but had to leave because of frequent bouts of malaria. Eventually, he transferred to Scottish Church College in central Calcutta, from where he graduated. The principal, Reverend William Hastie, considered Narendra a genius. In his entire teaching career, he said, he had never come across a lad of his talents, even in German universities, among students of philosophy. The verdict from his peers was no different. A fellow student who later became a renowned scholar and philosopher, Rajendranath Seal, described his friend Narendranath as a free and unconventional spirit, immensely popular and of unconcealed brilliance. He had a strange magnetism and an unmistakable sense of authority. But behind the confidence was an increasing questioning about the meaning of life and reality. Narendranath's relentless inquiry into Hinduism attracted him to the ideas of a more egalitarian order and of a God without form, preached by Brahmo leaders like Devendranath Tagore and Keshab Chandra Sen. His questioning was in fact intensified by his study of Western philosophers like John Stuart Mill, David Hume and Herbert Spencer, and resulted in what has been described as a settled philosophical skepticism. So it was in the hope of countering this skepticism that on his very first meeting with Ramakrishna, Narendra asked him, as he had asked so many others before him, "Have you seen God?" The others had evaded answering, but without a moment's hesitation, Ramakrishna replied, "Yes," he said, "I have seen God. I see him as I see you here, only more clearly."
রাখরে প্রহরী সমদম দুই জানে মন চরণী নিকেতনে মন চরণী।
The unique interaction between spiritual master and his rational, questioning disciple was to last nearly 5 years. There were other gifted young men in the circle around the saint of Dakshineshwar, but he had no doubt that Narendra was special. And his spiritual training continued ceaselessly, first at Dakshineshwar and finally at Kashipur, where the last year of Ramakrishna's fatal illness was spent. Although he was irresistibly drawn to the simple man of God, Narendra would not take anything on trust, and neither did Ramakrishna want him to. He would say, "Test me as moneylenders test their coins. You must not accept me until you've tested me thoroughly." Perhaps this was the training that led Narendra to tell his own disciples in later life, "Begin with disbelief." Eventually it was not just what Ramakrishna said, but what he was that finally led Narendra to accept him as his undisputed master. The master who was to show him that God exists in man and that the path to God can only end in that realization. On the face of it, there might seem to be a difference in Ramakrishna's devotion to Kali and Narendra's emphasis on the Vedantic unity between a personal God and an impersonal Godhead. But Ramakrishna explained, and his pupils soon saw, that there was no real difference between the two, that all paths to God were equally valid, whether they were dualistic, as in Ramakrishna's adoration and worship of Kali, or in the non-dualistic doctrine of Vedanta, in which the worshipper and the worshipped are one. Here then was how the seed was sown of the essence of Swami Vivekananda's later teachings, on the need not just to tolerate different religions, but to accept them as all being equally true. The Vedantic conviction that all beings and all that exists are part of God had also an important practical implication. The differences created by man must therefore be illusory. And if every man is God, what better way to serve God than to serve man? It was Ramakrishna who also told Narendra that religion is not for empty bellies, leaving him in no doubt as to how best he could serve God. Once when Narendra expressed a keen desire for a prolonged state of samadhi or spiritual bliss, the master told him, "Shame on you, I thought you'd be like a banyan tree and thousands of people would rest in your shade. But now I see you are seeking your own liberation." And in this way, Ramakrishna's spiritual heir was taught all that he needed to know. But his period of training was soon to end. The discovery that their master was terminally ill drew the group of young men around him closer still, each of them taking turns to nurse and take care of him at their garden house in Kashipur. And to the end, Ramakrishna never lost his belief that it would be his Naren who would best carry his message to the world outside. As the end neared, critically ill and unable to speak, the master wrote on a piece of paper, "Narendra will teach others." After Ramakrishna's death, the first crucial decision that Narendra and his brother disciples took was to renounce worldly life. Their master had gone from their midst, and they had nothing except their shared experiences and their faith in him. But it was enough. They all knew that their lives were committed. They would not forsake their ideals now. And so it was that the Ramakrishna monastic order was born. The Baranagar Mott remained the base of Ramakrishna's disciples, but they would from time to time leave it as wandering monks. Narendra did this too, but each time he would return, drawn by his responsibilities there. Nevertheless, India's holy places had a special attraction for the young monk.
Buddham sharanam gacchami sangham sharanam gacchami dhammam sharanam gacchami.
Even before Ramakrishna's death, Narendra had visited Bodh Gaya and for long hours had meditated under the sacred peepal tree. He was profoundly moved by Buddha's renunciation and compassion, which he believed to be central to all true religion. He described him as the one and only absolutely sane man in human history, wondrous in compassion, perfect in reason. He took patriotic pride in the fact that Buddhism was the only religion which had proselytized without bloodshed. He regarded Buddha as the greatest of men because, Above all, he never claimed worship. Varanasi too drew him more than once. It was not merely the center of India's religious life, it was the seat of Shiva, the god of renunciation.
Mano buddhirahankaraha chittaminaham chidananda rupaha Shivoham Shivoham.
Those images, which were to stay with him throughout his life, fueled his belief that religion was at the center of India's life, sustaining her cultural unity. While the tradition was predominantly Hindu, he had also noted how Islamic art and culture had become a part of the nation's rich heritage.
Chidananda rupaha Shivoham Shivoham.
These relatively short journeys whetted Narendra's appetite for more. He had already begun to reject all distinctions of religion and caste. He also saw that despite a glorious past, most of Indian life was sunk in abject poverty, ignorance and superstition. It was clear that this was the challenge before him, but it was equally clear that he must first know more of the country and its problems. Finally, in 1890, he began his journey of discovery of his country. Over the next 3 years, shedding all traces of his identity, adopting first one name and then another, he traveled from the mouth of the Ganges to the river sites of the Doab, from the Himalayas in the north to Land's End in the south. It was this journey that truly transformed his personality, from Narendranath Datta into Swami Vivekananda, making him a condensed India. The India he represented at the World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago, and it was the India that became, as he said later, the queen of his adoration. In July 1890, accompanied by a brother monk, he first set out for the Himalayas. Traveling as mendicants and mostly on foot, it was an arduous journey, and they fell ill more than once. But his spirit soared as he beheld the splendor of the mountains. Mountains that for the rest of his life would symbolize all that he held precious about his country: wisdom, strength, realization, and renunciation. He later wrote, "These Himalayas stand for renunciation, and as our forefathers used to be attracted to it in the latter days of their life, so strong souls from all over this earth, in time to come, will be attracted to this father of mountains. When all this fight between communities and all these differences in dogmas will not be remembered anymore, and quarrels between your religion and my religion will have vanished altogether. When mankind will understand that there is but one eternal religion, and that is the perception of the divine within, and the rest is mere froth." From now on, he assumed the name of Swami Vivedishananda, wishing to travel alone and unknown. He wanted the dust of India to cover up his footprints. In Rajasthan, he encountered both beauty and abject poverty, coming face to face with not only feudal magnificence, but the stark reality of the common man's existence. Based on these early lessons learned and observed firsthand, he was to later tell his disciples, "Throw aside your scriptures in the Ganga and teach the people first the means of procuring their food and clothing, and then you will find time to read them the scriptures." Rajasthan offered other lessons as well. One evening, as a guest of the Maharaja of Khetri, he agreed to attend a cultural extravaganza organized for him. Realizing later that a dancing girl was to sing, he rushed to leave, explaining that a monk was not allowed such pleasures. As he left, the plaintive strains of the young girl's song drifted up to him. Deeply moved by the meaning of the song, the Swami saw that this was the truest test of his own belief in the oneness of all beings. Asking her forgiveness, he said, "Mother, I am guilty of disrespect, but your song has awakened my consciousness." The journey didn't end there. Going west, he traveled extensively in Gujarat, where he spoke of the need to preach true Hinduism throughout the world. In Porbandar, a Sanskrit scholar, impressed by the Swami's brilliance, urged him to go to the west, where his interpretation of Hinduism would be met by open minds and appreciation. Throughout these years, he didn't merely follow the well-worn pilgrim routes or visit only the famous pilgrimage sites. He walked the barren country roads, through the bazaars in the cities, into the palaces of princes, as well as the hovels of the poor. Spurning religious and caste differences, openly defiant of orthodox Hindu society, it was an exploration of living India, and it raised in his mind profound contradictions of class and caste, all of which he tried to reconcile with his own scientific rationalism. travelled west through Bombay, Pune, Kolhapur and Belgaum, the nature of his mission became increasingly clear to the restless monk. He saw that the task before him was nothing short of the regeneration of India. But the nation couldn't grow in isolation. It needed the infusion of new ideas and techniques and considerable resources. The value of wider interaction with the West led to the idea that he should perhaps attend the Chicago Parliament of Religions. While spreading Indian religious thought, he would also try to obtain the West's material assistance for his immediate national tasks. Further south, Vivekananda visited Mysore and then Cochin and Travancore in Kerala, where he was warmly received. And from Rameshwaram, the Swami went to Kanyakumari. Overcome by his travels, he stood for a long time staring out to sea. And suddenly he flung himself into the water and swam to a rock some distance from the shore. Evening turned into night and night into morning. And still the Swami sat on that rock recalling all that he had seen. The stark misery of the Indian people, mute victims of religious and political oppression. He remembered his vow to dedicate himself to the service of God. But this God, he was convinced, was revealed through humanity. "May I be born again and again," he exclaimed, "and suffer 1,000 miseries. If I may only worship the God I believe in, my God the wicked, my God the afflicted, my God the poor of all races." The Swami wondered how he would gather the resources to realize his great vision. Brooding and alone, he sat in silence. And on that tip of the rock, the answer came. Although he was certain in his heart that he must undertake his mission to the West, the Swami prayed for divine guidance. He sought and received the blessings of the Holy Mother Sharada Devi for his journey. He received many offers of help for his mission. Eventually, his disciple, the Raja of Khetri, presented him an orange silk robe and a turban, money and a ticket on the ship which would take him across the ocean. Heading first for Chicago, where the Parliament of Religions was to be held at the Art Institute, Vivekananda's first experience of the West was far from encouraging. With little money, no prior arrangements, hungry and weary, he knocked on many doors but was met with indifference. It was some chance acquaintances which developed into warm friendships that changed everything. He stayed temporarily as a guest in a farmhouse called Breezy Meadows in Massachusetts. Here, his lectures on India attracted many admirers. Dr. Henry Wright, professor of Greek at Harvard, was one such admirer who soon became an invaluable friend. While arranging introductions for the Parliament of Religions, he said, "To ask you, Swami, for your credentials is like asking the sun for its right to shine." On Monday, September the 11th, 1893, the Parliament of Religions began its deliberations. to discuss the major human concerns of the time. The spacious hall was packed with 7,000 people waiting to hear the delegates who rose to speak their well-rehearsed speeches one by one. Most delegates spoke about their own sect, eager to demonstrate the superiority of their ideals over others. The unknown Hindu monk was totally unprepared. He had never before addressed such an assembly. When he was asked to speak, he was overcome by stage fright and asked the chairman to call him a little later. Several times he postponed the summons. At last he came to the rostrum. He began simply, "Sisters and brothers of America," he said. Instantly, thousands rose in their seats, cheering and applauding, deeply moved to hear a man who had shed formal words to speak to them with the natural warmth of a brother. It was some time before the applause subsided. The Swami spoke of the oneness of all religions, and quoting the Hindu scriptures said, "Whosoever comes to me in whatsoever form, I reach him. All men are struggling through different paths, which in the end lead to me." He also spoke of the need to end sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. But their time is come, and I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions with the sword or the pen, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal. The effect was electric. The 30-year-old monk changed the nature of the parliament. People clamored to hear him. The New York Herald said, "He is undoubtedly the greatest figure in the parliament." And the Boston Evening Post wrote, "He is a great favorite at the parliament. If he merely crosses the platform, he is applauded." They keep Vivekananda till the end of the program to make people stay till the end. The Swami addressed the Congress at least a dozen times, transforming a dry, often antagonistic gathering of theologians into a vital and fruitful encounter between East and West. He explained the essentials of India's spiritual and philosophical thought. He touched upon the central truth, to evolve God out of man, that bound the three great Indian religions, Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. It was the same desire to harmonize different religions that led him to write later of the need to combine Vedantic theories with practical Islam. India, he said, needed a Vedanta brain and Islam body. But Vivekananda was clear about the immediate reality before the Indian people. The crying need in the East, he reminded his affluent audience, was not of religion. It is bread that the suffering millions of burning India cry out for, with parched throats. It is an insult to a starving people to offer them religion. It's an insult to a starving man to teach him metaphysics. Soon after the Congress, he went on a whirlwind tour of the Midwest and the East, delivering a dozen or more lectures a week. His travels earned him the title of the Cyclonic Hindu. But his path was not always easy. The young man's courage and outspoken attitude disturbed some. His words particularly angered the Christian missionaries, who reacted to his criticism of the West's greed and hypocrisy. At a meeting he told them, "You are not Christians, return to Christ." Vivekananda moved to the East Coast, where he began serious spiritual discourses and completed his great work, Raja Yoga, which was widely acclaimed. He founded the Vedanta Society of New York in 1894, with tolerance and religious universalism as its guiding principles. In the 4 years that he was away in both America and Europe, Vivekananda built up a large following. Some of his foreign disciples decided to give up everything they had and join him in his work in India. Notable among them were Margaret Noble, later Sister Nivedita, who devoted herself to women's education in India. J.J. Goodwin, Sister Christine, Josephine MacLeod, Captain and Mrs. Sevier. In 1897, enriched by his 4 years of travel in the West, the Swami felt the immediate task before him was to work for India's regeneration from within the country. He had come to America unknown and unsure of his position. He now returned to his homeland as a hero and as its most important advocate of Vedanta. Shortly before he came back to his country, Vivekananda had said, "Now I have but one thought, and that is India." It was a triumphant return for the beggar sannyasi. In Madras, where he first landed, and later in Calcutta at the Showbazar Palace, he was given a rousing reception. Unprecedented crowds collected to greet him and welcome him home. But for Vivekananda, this was the beginning of the practical implementation of his life's work. Away from the public gaze, there was a quieter reunion with his brother monks. Together they moved the monastery across the river to a garden house at Belur. He spent hours meditating in his room overlooking the water. With a clear view of Baranagar, where he last saw Ramakrishna, and of Dakshineshwar, where almost a decade earlier he had met the master who changed his life. It was in an adjoining area on the banks of the river that he formally consecrated Belur Mott in 1898. A few months after his return, he decided to establish the Ramakrishna mission, distinct from the monastery at Belur but interrelated. It would be based on the non-sectarian teachings of the Vedanta and would emphasize humanitarian services, education and social work. The institutional framework was thus established for the worship of God through the service of man. I consider, he said, that the great national sin is the neglect of the masses. and that this is one of the causes of our downfall. If we want to regenerate India, we must work for them. The education of women was also one of Vivekananda's primary concerns, and within a year after his return, the Nivedita Girls' School was started. Vivekananda also outlined his idea of a monastery exclusively for women. His idea has taken full shape in the Sharda Mott, only a few hundred yards from Dakshineshwar. Run and managed entirely by women monks, the Sharda Monastery continues to attract women from all over India and the world to work for women's education, training and health with centers all over the country. Inspired by his goal of India's regeneration, Vivekananda set up institution after institution to improve both material and spiritual life in the country. Those modest beginnings have grown into an enormous network of spiritual and humanitarian services all over the nation, from hospitals to schools for girls and boys, to institutions for the disabled, orphanages, and cultural centers. And of course the 99 Ramakrishna monasteries and missions in India and 33 in different parts of the world, from America and Europe to Russia and Japan. All of them based on the essence of Vedanta, the oneness of all being. It was here in his favorite room that he spent most of his time during his last years. Throughout his life, music and writing had been a passion with Vivekananda. And at Belur, in this corner of the room overlooking the river, he continued his work, writing about his intense love of India. Despite a second trip to the West, it was his work in India that remained his passion in these years. On his return to Madras in 1897, he declared, "For the next 50 years, this alone shall be our keynote. This, our great Mother India." Now back in Belur, writing his most important essays on national problems, he wanted everyone to proclaim with him, "The soil of India is my highest heaven." He had often blamed the educated but parasitical upper classes for the nation's decline. Now he wrote, "Forget not that the lower classes, the ignorant, the poor, the illiterate, the cobbler, the sweeper, are your flesh and blood, your brothers." About his works, Mahatma Gandhi wrote, "After having gone through them, the love I had for my country became 1,000-fold." Subhash Chandra Bose called Vivekananda the spiritual father of the modern nationalist movement. Nehru described him as one of the great founders of the modern national movement of India. Sri Aurobindo saw in his work the awakening soul of the nation. And Tagore said, "Read Vivekananda if you want to know India." But Vivekananda's health was failing, and he didn't live long after his ideas were put into effect. Now even traveling in India, which had so sustained him in the past, was becoming tiring and difficult. Even so, in 1902, he made the journey to Varanasi. It was to be the last time that he returned to this, the seat of Shiva, on the banks of the Ganga. Returning to Belur, he spent more and more time in his room, meditating, writing, meeting his brother monks. On the 4th of July 1902, Swamiji went to the chapel in the morning. He prayed for 3 hours and then sang a song about Kali.
Shamama ki amar kalo re, Shamama ki amar kalo, loke bole kali kalo, loke bole kali kalo, আমার মন তো বলে না কালো রে শ্যামা মা কি আমার কালো রে শ্যামা মা কি আমার কালো.
The whole day he seemed to be in high spirits. In the afternoon he went for a long walk on the banks of the river.
শ্যামা মা কি আমার কালো রে শ্যামা মা কি আমার কালো.
And when it was dark, he spent some time in solitary meditation in his room. Then he asked for all the windows to be opened and lay down in silence. At around 9 o'clock, he passed away, entering into what his brother monks and disciples called Mahasamadhi. What did he merge into? Perhaps there's a glimpse of an answer in a song he composed.
নাহি জ্যোতি নাহি সূর্য নাহি জ্যোতি নাহি শশাঙ্ক সুন্দর ভাসে ভূমি ছায়া ভাসে ভূমি ছায়া বিশ্ব চরাচর নাহি সূর্য নাহি জ্যোতি নাহি সূর্য নাহি জ্যোতি সে ধারা বদ্ধ হল শূন্য শূন্য মিলা সে ধারাও ভদ্র শূন্য শূন্য মিলাইল অবাং মানস গোচরম অবাং মানস গোচরম বুঝে প্রাণ বুঝে যার নাহি সূর্য নাহি জ্যোতি নাহি শশাঙ্ক সুন্দর ভাসে ভূমি ছায়া সম ছবি বিশ্ব চরাচর নাহি সূর্য নাহি জ্যোতি নাহি সূর্য